During the Second World War, executions and mass killings were carried out on a huge scale. Under the guise of the conflict, many nations used it to massacre populations and civilians on a level never seen before. The civilian cost of the war was far greater than the military cost, and as different countries occupied new lands, they sought to inflict terror on the people there. Across Europe, for example, groups such as the Einsatzgruppen killed millions of people after the advancements of the German army, and the Russians carried out horrific war crimes against populations when they advanced towards Germany, towards the conclusion of the war in Europe. With people and armies travelling to new places, there was often a struggle by those living in lands to continue whilst their country was occupied, or whilst troops were using their homeland as a base. Some soldiers found themselves thousands of miles from home too, but in Australia there was one American soldier who found himself a very long way from home, but he carried out a spate of murders that terrorised Melbourne. Eddie Leonski is the only citizen of another country to have been executed in Australia, based on the law in his own country. So join us today as we look at the execution of Eddie Leonski, and remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. Edward Joseph Leonski was born on December the 12th, 1917, in New Jersey. He was the sixth child of his parents who were Russian immigrants. It was noted that his family life at the time was not stable, and Eddie grew up in an abusive family where his parents abused alcohol and were reliant on it. One of his brothers was also placed inside of a psychiatric institution, and it was said that his mother was controlling and overprotective. Leonski was regarded as a mummy's boy, and he was picked on by local children in his neighbourhood. Despite his childhood not being ideal, no one would know the monster that Eddie Leonski would become. It was later said that his crimes were born from a resentment or hatred of his mother, and they even wished to kill her at one point. Following his schooling, he worked as a delivery boy for a local business, but as America entered the Second World War, Leonski was called up for military service in the army. This must have been a very interesting time for the young man, as he was seen leaving his home and leaving his family behind that inflicted damage upon him. But little did Eddie Leonski know that when he left for the army, he would never see his family again in America. He was called up for the army in February 1941 and was transferred to Australia, and in particular Melbourne, arriving there on the 2nd of February 1942. US soldiers were based in Melbourne at the time, and it was said that when they arrived, they brought with them jazz music, chocolate bars, nylon stockings and other luxuries. But amongst their midst they also brought with them a serial killer. The country itself had been living on the edge for some time, as a few months before, 242 Japanese aircraft had attacked Darwin in the north of Australia, killing hundreds of people. There was censorship in Australia at the time, and panic was going through the civilian population, and more shelters were being built. Guard posts were being established on the coast to prevent a Japanese attack or invasion, but many people thought the country would fall. The Australians turned to the US to help, and in Melbourne in 1942, a large American tent settlement turned up, named Camp Pelle, based in the Royal Park near to the city's zoo. It was a time inside Melbourne of great fear, and things were to get worse. Eddie Leonski lived inside of Camp Pelle, and his job was to prepare breakfast in the tented city for the American soldiers. Because of this, it meant his day was done at around 11 AM, meaning that he had the rest of the day to do what he liked if he wanted. He was known for drinking himself silly, getting drunk before midday, and also going to the local pubs and inns and getting into fights. He was also a bit of a show-off, but Leonski would be known for more than just being a drunken American soldier. He began a crime spree in which he would murder 3 women inside of the city. On the 3rd of May 1942, after being in Melbourne for a few months, a 40-year-old woman named Ivy Violet McLeod was found dead inside of Albert Park. She had been beaten savagely and was strangled to death. Her murder stood out as the killer left her purse, and this was found on her body, which meant they were not dealing with a robber, but a cold-blooded killer. Her body had been left half naked and was arranged in a horrific position. The authorities tried to find a lead, but nothing came up until 6 days later another woman's body was found. The body of 31-year-old Pauline Thompson was found after she had been on a night out, and it was noted that she was last seen spending time with a young man who was described as having an American accent. Eddie Leonski had been drinking gin squashes with Thompson, who was a talented singer who had come to Melbourne to perform for the American soldiers. As she kissed him goodnight, he killed her, strangling her to death. These murders caused great panic amongst the Melbourne population and hinted towards one of the American soldiers being a serial killer. One of those men brought to hopefully help protect Australia was in fact terrorising it. Women in the city began to panic, thinking that every American soldier they saw could have been the killer. The killer began to be known as a Brownout killer, given as Melbourne during wartime kept low light in the city and not a full blackout. 15 days after the first murder, Eddie Leonski would strike one final time. Gladys Hoskins, who was 40, was murdered while she was walking home from work at the chemistry library at the University of Melbourne. She was a woman like the other victims who had carved out her own way in life, but it would be taken by Leonski. After murdering Hoskins, he made an error, as later that evening he approached another woman and asked her for directions. He was out of breath and covered in mud. Once this information was given to police, the description given of Leonski matched a man who was seen with Pauline Thompson, and the survivors were able to pick out Eddie Leonski, the 24-year-old serial killer, out from a lineup of American servicemen. It was also noted how he attacked other women at the time, as these survivors were also able to help identify him. Eddie Leonski's crimes shocked Australia and the American military, and he was placed on trial charged with 3 murders. Despite his trial occurring on Australian soil, it was conducted under American military law, as he was a member of the military. Leonski confessed to the crimes and was sentenced to death at a court-martial hearing on the 17th of July 1942. His sentence was appealed, but this was rejected by General MacArthur, who confirmed the death sentence. It was MacArthur himself who even signed the order of the execution to ensure that Leonski paid for his crimes. For MacArthur, Leonski had brought needless terror to the country and had caused relations between the Melbourne population and his forces to become strained. There were issues as to who would perform the execution, and the executioner was given guaranteed anonymity for 75 years, and all we know is that he was a short and solid man who brought his own tools for the job. He used a coiled nylon rope 2 centimetres thick to perform the job. Eddie Leonski was told of his execution a few days before, and he studied the method of execution over the weekend, knowing that somewhere in the prison, gallows were being built for him. He knew the gallows were being tested to ensure his death was quick and clean. He knew all of the procedure, but it was said it didn't bother him. 2 priests came to see him, and they had a Thanksgiving service with Leonski, before they offered him a cigarette, and after a few puffs on the 9th of November 1942, he was brought for his execution. A US Army officer arrived in his cell and said, "Private Leonski, in the name of the United States, you are now called upon to have the verdict of the court carried out." The officers accompanied him to his place of execution, and he was asked if he had anything to say, and he did not. He was led into a room where the gallows had been made, and the executioner in a leather mask stepped forward. He secured Eddie's legs in his hands, and also placed a black cloth cap over his head. Eddie nodded his head to the American doctors who he had sensed, and then the priests prayed in Latin. The hangman then secured the rope and noose over Leonski's head, and a witness said to him, "I'm sorry, buddy," but Leonski replied, "It's okay, pal, carry on." Then the hangman adjusted the noose, with the knot sitting under the angle of his jaw and on the left side of his neck. He then stepped back from the trapdoor, and the American guards did the same. He grabbed the lever and pulled in one swift motion, opening the trapdoor, and Leonski's body fell. Instantly he was killed by the drop. Eddie Leonski terrorised Melbourne during a few months, and he paid for his murderous spree with his life. He was permanently interred in the Schofield Barracks on the island of Hawaii, in a place marked for prisoners who died in military custody. He claimed he killed the 3 women as he had a twisted fascination with female singing voices and wished to take them from the women. He is remembered today as a Brownout Strangler, a dangerous and psychopathic serial killer who under the Second World War committed horrific crimes and was incredibly dangerous. Once again, thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.